Chris Carter here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Today, I want to talk about a different approach to this coaching search because I have Mike DeFabo from The Athletic on. What if the Steelers went the other side, went for an offensive head coach and brought in one of the Kubiaks, because there's two of them that could be interested in this coaching cycle. We'll talk about that, the potential of Andy Weidl leading the front office, what that impact that could have as he interviews with the Falcons, and Mike's inside story on what happened with Mike Tomlin's departure with the Steelers, all here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show in your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We think of making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. And every Thursday is Crossover Thursday, even when we don't have another team on here. But that is always presented by Prize Picks. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use code LOCKEDONNFL and you'll get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. As I said before, we're joined by the amazing Mike DeFabo. He's back from The Athletic. We love having him on this show. We'll get to your super breaking story you had last week on the Inside the Locker Room. That was amazing reporting on your stuff. I loved reading that on The Athletic. So great job, Mike. But Mike, I want to get to something that you talked about on Twitter, and you mentioned the potential of going with an offensive coach like a Mike McCarthy, a Klay Kubiak, or a Klint Kubiak. And I think that, I've talked here about, hey, I don't care if it's offense or defense. Get me a leader of men on either side of the ball. But what would you think the impact could be of a guy like one of the Kubiaks, who could be a young, innovative mind, bringing them to a franchise that historically has had defensive leaders at head coach?
Yeah, well, first of all, Chris, I completely agree with your sentiment that the bottom line is you're trying to get the right guy, whether that's an offensive, defensive guy. I mean, there have been special teams guys in the past. Bill Pecauer had a special teams background as well. But here's my point when it comes to offensive guys. So this is an offensive league. This is a quarterback-driven league. And I feel like part of the reason why the Steelers are looking for a head coach right now is because they were unable to identify, draft, and develop the successor to Ben Roethlisberger. And it seems like all the head coaches that have a quarterback, they're the ones that are getting better jobs. They're the ones that are have stability. The ones that don't have a quarterback, that's where they're struggling. And my point here is, if you've got a finite amount of resources, why not buy a playbook, buy a brain, buy the guy that's going to help you get that next quarterback and develop him? And so as you look at these candidates right now that they've started to interview, some of them in person, some of them virtually, it seems like they are on one of two sides of polar extremes. On one side, you've got the 62-year-old Mike McCarthy. Mm-hmm. And he's old, but he's got all that experience, right? And he's worked with Aaron Rodgers and Brett Favre, and even dating back to Joe Namath. Joe Montana, sorry, not that old. Dang, he's that old. But then on the other side, Chris, you've got these up-and-coming guys. Nate Scheelhaase, who's 35 years old and has never called plays, but is a passing game coordinator for the Rams, or Klay Kubiak, who's the offensive coordinator for the 49ers, 37 years old, but also in a similar circumstance where he actually doesn't call the plays. And so if it's me, and all things are equal, I like the idea of an offensive-minded head coach, but I would like to find a way to kind of thread that needle between, the young up-and-coming guy who maybe is yet to prove himself, and the old guy that you're thinking, man, if you bring in a 62-year-old Mike McCarthy, how long is he going to be here? And that's where Klint Kubiak, I think, is really an interesting name.
I think it could be really interesting to have him there. Klint Kubiak, also an interesting past in his path to the NFL, right? He started out at Texas A&M in the early 2010s, got his first coaching job under Leslie Frazier as a quality control coach for the Vikings, went back to college for a year, came back, worked under his dad, Gary Kubiak, with the Broncos for a few years, then eventually went to the Vikings, worked under Mike Zimmer. But then I think he really started to get his feet under him. He became the passing coordinator with the Niners in 2023. then joined the Saints as their offensive coordinator in 2024 when that offensive staff changed hands. He joined the Seahawks, and now here he is with another offense that's in the upper half of the NFL. And I mean, again, they're competing for a Super Bowl appearance. And when he was with the Niners, they were 12-5. Were able to get to the divisional round and win. They lost in the Super Bowl that year to the Chiefs. So he again is part of an offense that's part of a team that's highly competitive. So if you're Klint Kubiak, I see what you're saying there, man.
Yeah, and I think my main point here is when you look at these offensive coordinators who are really good and innovative and young, they get hired away. So like the only way you're going to be able to keep a good offensive mind is if you make him the head guy and you pay him more because he's the head coach. And that's, I think, my main point with this is like, this is an offensive league, and to get a great offensive mind and feel like you're going to have a tactical and schematic advantage each and every week with your coaching staff, I think you almost have to go this direction. Now, one thing I think is important to clarify, because people have been saying to me a lot, well, why didn't they reach out to Klint Kubiak? Why didn't they? The rules are very confusing, and there's different sets of rules based on where you fell within the playoff field. So if you're a coach and your team had a bye the first week, you were allowed to virtually interview during that week leading up to the first wild card game. The Pittsburgh Steelers still had Mike Tomlin as their coach. They were not able to virtually interview Klint Kubiak at that time. So now they missed that early window. They have to now wait until after these championship games on Sunday. And so I think Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, whatever, then we'll find out if Klint Kubiak is in their conversation or not. It's different for the Rams guys. And that's part of the reason why the Rams guys were the first names that came out, because the rules for if you were a wild card team where you had to interview after the wild card game and the couple days after that, similar to Arthur Smith, who people had requested him, but he wasn't able to interview virtually until that time. So just a point of clarification there. But that's my soapbox, Chris. That's my point of view when it comes to offensive versus defensive.
No, I feel you there. And I think that's also important here is that, like, there's a lot of push out there right now to say that the Steelers, the guys they're interviewing right now, that's their top targets. That's who they're looking for. They're definitely looking at McCarthy and definitely looking at Flores. And listen, they're considering those guys, but they couldn't interview a lot of guys in this process. And historically, the Steelers have gone for the younger coach who's coming up in the ranks. And both the Kubiaks, I believe, are in their 30s. They're guys who are figuring things out. They're on the way up, just like Chris Scheelhaase is, just like Nate Scheelhaase is, and they haven't been able to talk to those guys yet. So I don't think this coaching search is over at this point, or anywhere close to it. I don't think that they're wrapping things up and just going to tie on some boxes. Now, I do know that by Friday, when they interview Anthony Weaver, they will be technically Rooney Rule compliant, because they'll have done 2 in-person interviews with people of color. But at the same time, I don't think that that's going to mean that, okay, time's up. Let's go. Let's skip through this. I think these are, and here's the other thing about this, Mike, and I this was our leading point earlier in the week. But Klint Kubiak, Klay Kubiak, Chris Scheelhaase, I imagine all 3 of those names are big on a lot of people's lists right now.
Right.
And there's some franchise quarterbacks that need some head coaches like Josh Allen, like Lamar Jackson. And I wanted to get your sense, where do you think these coaches, if they were to look at these rosters and say, hey, I want to ride with this guy who's ready now, or do I want to go somewhere where I can build up a roster and then eventually find my own guy that I bring to prominence?
I mean, I think you can't pass up the opportunity to go coach Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson. I hate to say it. Like, the Steelers fans, I'm with you in the sense that you're like, this is a historic franchise. They've won 6 Super Bowls. You have a global fan base. You have the patience of a front office that they're not going to get rid of you 2-3 years if things don't go well. You're going to have a job for maybe a decade or 2 if you're pretty decent at it. But still, like, the opportunity to coach one of those MVP caliber quarterbacks is a very rare opportunity. And so that's going to put the Steelers down a couple pegs. I mean, another guy within that conversation is Jesse Minter. I mean, I think that he's a popular name right now. He's only 42 years old. And, sounds like there's a lot of buzz around him going to Baltimore. So the Steelers are competing with other teams. And just one point, like, I stood on my soapbox and I made my point about offense, Chris, but you look at like Shula, you look at Minter, you look at Weaver, they check a lot of the boxes that the Steelers historically have wanted in terms of defensive-minded, young, up and coming. So I'm not going to hate it, and I'm not going to criticize it if they get the right guy, no matter what side of the ball that guy's on.
I feel you, man. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk about now the report out there that Andy Weidl is interviewing for a GM job with the Falcons, what that could impact on the Steelers draft plans. We'll get to that and a lot more here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter, Mike DeFabo, stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I remind you this show is brought to you by Robinhood. What if sports were traded like markets? Now you can put your sports IQ to work in real time with Robinhood prediction markets. It's not you against the house. It's you participating in a live market. You can buy or sell your positions live all game long. Use your sports knowledge in the moments that matter. Robinhood prediction markets change the game. It's people moving the action. So when momentum shifts, you can move with it. I always knew the game, but never had a dynamic way to apply that knowledge. Now I can actively take part live in a market powered by the people. You're no longer just a spectator. Play by play, you decide. Trade every play with Robinhood. Now available across the U.S. Download the Robinhood app now to begin. We're also brought to you by Game Time. With the NFL playoffs in full swing, there's nothing like being at the game. The crowd noise, the energy, the cheering alongside other fans. Watching at home is great, but being in the stadium hits different. The frustrating part has always been getting the tickets. You're waiting in queues, dealing with logins, and watching prices change right at checkout. That's why the Game Time app gives the advantage back to the fans. It's the hack for unlocking amazing NFL tickets and experiences in just a few taps. You can pull up the Game Time app to check out upcoming NFL games like the Steelers finale against the Ravens, or you can go to all those conference championship games that are happening this weekend. If you want to travel to see that, Game Time is the best way to do that, including eventually the Super Bowl. So check out all that action there. The app is incredibly intuitive. Browsing is easy on it. Take the guesswork out of buying NFL tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms and conditions apply. Again, download the app, make an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Get back to being there live. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, Chris Carter, Mike DeFabo of The Athletic. Mike, we got the report out that Andy Weidl is interviewing for the Atlanta Falcons GM job. Now, it's not a given that he's going to get it. They probably have some people in mind. But Andy Weidl has been Omar Khan's right-hand man. He's been the guy that assembles the draft board. It feels like, especially if Andy Weidl was to get hired away right now, that could be a disaster for the Steelers because the Senior Bowl's next week, and the draft process is about to just ramp right up fast.
Yeah, I mean, Mike Tomlin had a big say in personnel decisions. And even at his press conference last week, Art Rooney said that the power structure was going to remain similar, where the head coach was going to have a significant say in roster construction, player evaluation, and ultimately the draft. And so I feel like you just lost a leading voice with Mike Tomlin when it comes to the decision-making, and you don't have anybody in that role yet. If you were to lose Andy Weidl, I just feel like that would be really significant. You'd lose him. You'd likely lose a couple scouts along with him. He's not going to be the only one that's going to leave. And I just feel like that would create such a power vacuum within this organization that's all about stability and continuity. And look, I'm a fan of Omar Khan generally. I think that he's a great wheeler and dealer. I think that he has a vision and he's been able to execute it. I think he's going to eventually show to be a master of the salary cap as his time goes on. But he's not the same type of football guy that Andy Weidl is. They came up through two very different tracks. Omar was more of the business side of things and earned his reputation and ultimately Art Rooney's respect and got the head nod because he was able to do that. But Andy's completely different. Andy had his hand in the dirt as an offensive lineman in Villanova. He came up through great scouting departments with Ozzie Newsome and the Baltimore Ravens. And then he went to, help build this great roster that the Philadelphia Eagles have been beating people with. Just basically saying, our guys were better than your guys, specifically in the trenches. And I know that the Steelers drafts have not been perfect. I think that they're a lot better than people realize. People are always more critical of their own team, and they seem to think that you're going to be able to find some star in the 6th round every year. You look at some of these picks, I think that they've generally done a good job. And I think that especially this year where they're going to have I think 11 picks, the latest that I looked at the latest projection, you're going to want a guy who's like grinding that film and who is one of the leading voices when it comes to identifying and ranking the talent. So, I think that it would be a big loss. That said, I don't think he's going to get the job. Our Falcons guy seems to think that there's a lot of momentum for Ian Cunningham, the assistant general manager of the Bears. So keep an eye out for that name. I think that that's the most likely avenue this goes. But I do wonder, man, like if you're a guy like Andy Weidl or you're a guy in a front office position, your ultimate goal is to become a general manager. And as much as Andy is a Pittsburgh guy through and through from Mount Lebanon, how can you pass on one of the 32 opportunities to be calling the shots and making all the decisions yourself?
I'm right with you. And to your point, the Steelers aren't a Super Bowl team yet. We said that going into this season, like their ceiling was making the playoffs, maybe winning a playoff game or two, but this was not a Super Bowl roster, much like Sean McDermott apparently told the Bills about their own roster. That's a whole other story. But look at the pieces that helped the Steelers be competitive this year. Because with TJ Watt falling off, Cam Hayward, he was still really good, but he wasn't a double-digit sack guy. They don't make it here without Joey Porter Jr., without Keanu Benton, Darnell Washington, Nick Herbig, even Broderick Jones when he was healthy, Troy Fautanu, Zach Frazier, Mason McCormick, Peyton Wilson, Derek Harmon, Jack Sawyer, YA. Like all these guys were either starters or really good backup contributors to this team that were pushing this team forward. All those guys are drafted in the last 3 years. They're developing a new nucleus that they're going to be able to feed off of for years. And Andy Weidl is at the center of that. And so I'm right with you that like losing him could be disastrous. I don't think it's going to happen like you. I think the Steelers are going to be able to keep him, but they need to do everything they can to keep this front office together because I do think they're cooking up some good stuff right now. I think Omar Khan, he's probably going to. What's really going to be interesting is now the second elevation of this, right? Like you said, the salary cap. How does he keep the right players in line? How does he keep Joey Porter Jr.? Does he keep Keanu Benton? How does he keep Darnell Washington? While
Nick Herbig, big question mark. Do you move on from – I mean, that's where Omar and Andy work hand in hand and why they make a good team, in my opinion, because they're going to have to figure out, do you move off of one of these edge rushers? Do you trade either – I mean, it's crazy nuclear decision, but do you trade TJ? Or do you decide, hey, it's time to trade Alex Highsmith? Much as I love him. I love Alex Highsmith. His family's great. He's a good guy in the community, well-deserving of the the nod for the Walter Payton Man of the Year for the Steelers or the Steelers nominee, that kind of thing. That's a business, though. And I think it's a business decision that they're going to have to make together. And that's why sometimes I've thought about this, Chris. Some franchises, you look at the Falcons. The Falcons have a president of football, and then they've got a general manager. Part of me wonders, should they just bump everybody up? Should Omar get a little bit of a promotion or change of title to president of football ops? And should Andy Weidl move into that GM role? Especially right now when you've lost Mike Tomlin, who's been such a central piece of your roster construction for so long. I think that there's almost a 0% chance they would consider something like that because it probably means increasing some pay for people. Yeah. But if I were calling the shots, I think that if I were the Steelers, I would say this is an opportunity to become more like the Eagles. The Eagles are a front office organization. The Pittsburgh Steelers were a head coach organization. You could become a team that says these decision makers have the biggest say, and the coach is clearly next on the pecking order. I don't know. I would at least consider something like that as a way to maintain the current structure because I do think that Andy and Omar together do make such a nice collaborative team.
That's a very interesting idea for you because I had thought about like, what if they could keep Weidl, make him a co-GM, but making Omar president would be very There's something there, man. Look at Mike DeFabo cooking up here yet again. We love it.
I'm thinking outside the box right now, Chris.
There we go, baby. But we're gonna let you cook a little bit more because you absolutely cooked with that story that you broke on what was it like inside the Steelers locker room when Mike Tomlin made his official statement. Oh, well, not official statement, but made his claim to the team. I'm stepping down, and the reaction that it brought from these players, the information that you got. Not gonna ask you to reveal too much, but diving more into that story and just the sense that you got on the impact of that. All next to be here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter, Mike DeFabo, stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you this show is also brought to you by Indeed. If you've ever hired someone who looked good on paper but wasn't the right fit, you know how important that is. When you want candidates who truly match what you're looking for, trust Indeed sponsored jobs. If you're hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job posts seen on other sites. Indeed sponsored jobs put your post at the top of the page and help you reach the right candidates faster. If I needed to hire someone for this show, I'd go straight to Indeed and be very specific about what I need. Real experience, not just a resume buzzword. Sponsored jobs boost your posts to the people who are the best match for your role, and that makes a real difference. Spend more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with less stress, less time, more results using Indeed sponsored jobs. Listeners of this show get $75 in sponsored job credit and help give your job the premium placement it deserves at Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL. Again, go to Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL to get $75 in sponsored job credit only at Indeed. Hiring, do it the right way with Indeed. We're also brought to you by TurboTax. TurboTax knows it's tax season and doesn't have to take over your life. This year, TurboTax is making it easier than ever to just hand things off and move on with your day. TurboTax full service, you can have your taxes done for you by a trusted local expert start to finish without the stress or the guesswork. Instead of spending hours trying to figure out forms, you can meet with a local TurboTax expert in person or connect online. They handle everything from W-2s to self-employment forms and work to get you every deduction. You can upload your documents, go about your day, and get updates right in the TurboTax app. It's a huge time saver and gives real peace of mind knowing an expert is handling it. And if you need a TurboTax expert that you didn't file last year, just file by February 28th. Take taxes off your plate and get back to your life. Visit TurboTax.com/local to book your appointment today. We're back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter, Mike DeFabo, breaking things down for you here. Mike, you kind of shook up the world when you released your story about the inside the Steelers locker room about Mike DeFabo on The Athletic. If you haven't read that story, go read it right now because it was fantastic. We talked about it here on the show last week. But Mike, I wanted to give you a sense to just, before we dive into like the politics and some of the fallout of this, give me the sense of just like the emotion. If someone hasn't read this story, the feeling that you got and the core of what was really happening in that room.
Yeah, well, first of all, I think a lot of people maybe saw screenshots. Maybe they saw 2-3 sentences. Maybe they read recaps of this story that were written by, Steelers Depot or Yahoo or some aggregation site. What I would encourage people to do is read the story in its entirety so you get the sense of why I wrote the story. And the point of the story was not about any one player. The point of the story was that Mike Tomlin's legacy, no matter how you feel about him, it lies and it lives on with his players. And until his very last moment when he informed his team that he was going to be stepping down, he had control of that locker room. And he had guys who were ready to run through a wall for him, who believed in him and wanted him to be their head football coach. That was the point of the story. And to just capture what was one of the most important moments and historic moments in the history of the Pittsburgh Steelers organization. They've had just 3 head coaches since 1969. This was a seminal moment within the history that players were willing to talk to me about how they felt in what they saw and what they observed. And so some of the things that happened were, Mike Tomlin came into the room, kind of starts the way he always does. And apparently in many of his speeches at the end of the year, he'll say, some of us are going to be here next year, some of us won't. And very often he'll follow that by saying, but it's back to the drawing board. And instead of saying it's back to the drawing board, that's when he launched into apparently saying, listen, I just met with Art Rooney and I talked with Omar Khan. I'm going to be stepping down. And the story goes on to explain basically the reaction within the room. And guys were shaken. They were emotional. They were stunned, most of them. Some of them said that they had a little bit of an inkling that something could happen just because there was so much buzz in the media, but they just didn't believe it until they finally heard it from their coach's mouth. And so afterwards, after he delivered his speech, apparently he told them, like, look, I want better for you. He was building a lot of them up, putting it on, taking his ego out of it and saying, like, I want you guys to have it better than what I can deliver for you right now. And at least that's the message that was relayed to me through the players. And after that, the team rose to their feet and they gave him a standing ovation. And they said that then there was basically this long line, like what you would have at a funeral, where every player was going. And, well, first of all, Tomlin like tipped his cap kind of. And I think we can all imagine him doing that because that's kind of a classic, iconic Tomlin move. And he walked to the door and then everybody kind of walked by and dapped him up and gave him hugs and said their goodbyes and said their thank yous to him. So that was the point of the story. The story was about Mike Tomlin. And then obviously there were individual players who were affected in a significant way. But the way I understand it, there were a lot of people who were emotional in that room and for good reason. And you just think about, like, look at some of the videos that were surfacing from the Bills' loss.
Yeah.
Deion Dawkins is a big, tough dude who, like, mows people down for a living. And he was bawling and he had to end his interview because he was in tears. We saw Josh Allen step to the podium and he's crying and he's saying that he's sorry and he wishes he could have done more. I know that there are people who have now said, like, this should have been a moment for the players. This is getting out. Adam Thielen went on Pardon My Take podcast today and started talking about things that happened. Cam Hayward revealed additional details. I think Christian Kuntz on his podcast talked about a couple things. This was going to get out, and this was going to be something that, it is shared. And I think that the important part was, and again, it's about Mike Tomlin. That was the point of the story. It was not the people who screen grabbed one part with Aaron Rodgers and spread that around the internet. The point was Mike Tomlin.
I agree. And I think that that's the thing here is that Mike Tomlin is, we talked about this yesterday a bit too. Jay Glazer talked about how Mike Tomlin has plugged up so many problems in the Steelers organization over the years that, could be that were things that were beyond the head coach, that were just funding problems. And there's questions if someone will just be able to come in and do the same thing. I think there's an appreciation for throughout all of that. Like, you look at that Bills press conference, and again, that's not the head coach, but it was the owner and the GM, and they were dumping it. Like, they were calling out Keon Coleman and saying how bad of a, making it out like, well, the coaches wanted him. You don't ever see Mike Tomlin dump on a player unless he's trying to motivate that player by saying like when Gunnar Olszewski messes up a kickoff, or Caleb Johnson, those obvious moments, right? But like, whenever there's something, how many times have we tried to get through him, to get through Mike Tomlin, Mike, when we're sitting here and we're asking him questions and he will just wall us off and be like, nice try, not doing it, or just be like, I'm not answering that, and just keep
right
on. It's what he did so well. And like, I always sensed that was something the players, respected. I think it also came through in your story that, like, whatever the pressure was from the outside media, it stopped at him. He was that shield for them. And I think that there's a lot of that I think that Mike Tomlin did, not just for them, but for the organization.
Yeah, without a doubt. And again, like, Mike Tomlin is not an infallible character. He's not a perfect coach. In a lot of ways, I think that Mike Tomlin made the decision that was the right one. I think that it may have been time for him to step away. But I think something that's never going to be in question for me, from somebody who has been there and seen what he did with players and seen their reaction, is just the impact he had. And one of the things I respect about Mike Tomlin, and always will, is that he was able to put the person above the player in every instance. Whether that was telling Ryan Clark, you are not playing in this football game because I wouldn't let my son play if he had sickle cell anemia and we were playing at altitude because of the health risks. Willie Colon, we did a story a couple years back on The Athletic, and Willie Colon said he was in a deep, dark depression during an injury, and Mike Tomlin pulled him out of that and said, you've got to travel with the team. We need you around here. Lifted his spirits. And Willie Colon said, he basically saved my life during that time. So, that was some of what I was looking to capture. And I think that I'm not over romanticizing it. I'm not being sentimental. I was capturing real emotion of what was going on. And players, as they were telling me this, were like, oh man, you're going to make me cry, like reliving this again. Or they would say to me, yeah, this is when I started to get emotional. I will just address the one part that seems to be controversial for some reason.
Sure.
People seem to not like that I included the part that Aaron Rodgers, got emotional and broke down, and multiple teammates heard him telling Mike Tomlin, I'm sorry. Let me just explain kind of the way that I view this and the way that I would hope that other people view this situation. Aaron Rodgers was portrayed by the national media as largely a selfish person and a bad teammate. And while you can say whether you thought he was good, medium, bad this season at different points, what I witnessed was a guy who very much poured into his teammates and connected with his teammates and this team on such a deeper level that then at the very end, there was an emotional moment for him that he wasn't able to accomplish what they wanted to in the postseason. And especially that he wasn't able to get it done for the coach. Now, another important point here, just because people said that he said he was sorry, no one thinks that it's Aaron Rodgers' fault, right? Aaron Rodgers is not responsible for the last decade of Pittsburgh Steelers football, and nobody thinks that he does. I think that just shows how much he wanted to succeed for Mike Tomlin. And you hear similar things from people all the time, like I mentioned, Josh Allen. So there's that point of it. The other part of it is if you go back and you watch Aaron Rodgers' documentary, there's a part within that where he talks about how growing up, he said he only saw his father cry one time, and that was when his grandfather died. And you can go back and watch the documentary. He talks about how there was not room for emotion. And so to me, this was a positive thing that he may have been, gotten to an emotional point, because it shows a level of character development and personal development that he felt like he could share his emotions in that way. So I know that we live in this macho football world where anything that happens within this locker room, don't dare tell those bad media guys who are just after you, and we put up with that every single day. Every single time that I talked to Aaron Rodgers, we had to listen to him talk about how much, the media was full of stuff and how whatever. I was trying to capture a real thing that I think if people legitimately were to take a step back, I think that they would agree that this was a positive and portrayed everybody from Mike Tomlin to TJ Watt to Aaron Rodgers in a very positive way. And there's nothing malicious or even negative about what was written there. And I would hope that they see it that way. Obviously, they're not going to, because it's the internet. Yeah. But that's my point of view. And again, I would hope that people just read the story to get a sense of why I actually wrote it. And again, it was because of Mike Tomlin.
Yeah, look, man, I got that. And I think that anyone who reads it for real and isn't trying to be negative just to be negative online, I think that most people see that, and listen, I know players, look, I think part of this is also who Mike Tomlin was, right? How many times have we seen, like you saw, like those post-game reactions where, coaches are firing up their teams? We've never seen that. Like the only time we've ever seen inside the Steelers locker room when Mike's talking is when Antonio Brown was doing a live Instagram or whatever, right? Because he never allowed us in there. And we'd have to stand back down the hallway, wait for them to go in. They'd have their team talk, and then we were allowed in the room. And that's because he always protected the players. And to him, that's why he never, when people said he never says anything in the press conferences, we weren't the people he values to talk to. Who he valued to talk to was his players. That's who always mattered the most to him. That's why they got his last words. And there is no Mike Tomlin press conference. He doesn't owe anyone else anything else. He sees, I owe my players this explanation and this conversation. Everyone else, they've never mattered. And so I think that's who Mike Tomlin is, and I think that's what you did a great job capturing in your story. And I hope that more people come to see that as time moves on. Again, great job by you, man. We gotta call it here, or my people at Locked On will start yelling at me for being too long in the show. But Mike, thanks so much for joining us here. Let people know they can find you, follow you, and get more of your work.
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me on social media at Mike DeFabo. I'm also on Twitter, Blue Sky, all that. And obviously, you can catch all my stuff on The Athletic.
Absolutely. He's Mike DeFabo. I'm Chris Carter. You can find me on Twitter's, Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky, wherever. At Carter Critiques is always my handle. Read my work in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette by going to post-gazette.com. Find me here on the Locked On Steelers podcast every day, Monday through Friday, on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of those daily Monday through Friday episodes back here tomorrow, finishing out the week right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.